What happens when a Hollywood A-lister's patience finally snaps on live television? You won't believe what unfolds when Seth Rogen sits down with Jimmy Kimmel for what was supposed to be a lighthearted promotional interview. Last night's episode of Jimmy Kimmel Live delivered the most explosive confrontation in late-night television history, and the shocking footage has everyone talking. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when two entertainment industry powerhouses go head-to-head in the most uncomfortable television moment of the year. The stage was set for disaster from the moment Seth Rogen walked onto the Jimmy Kimmel Live set. What viewers at home couldn't see was the palpable tension backstage, where Rogen had already expressed frustration with the show's producers about the direction of the planned interview. Sources close to the production reveal that Kimmel had specifically requested to focus on Rogen's recent comments about the film industry's treatment of writers during the strikes, despite Rogen's team explicitly asking to keep the conversation centered on his new projects. As the cameras rolled and the familiar late-night banter began, Kimmel wasted no time diving into controversial territory. "Seth, you've been pretty vocal about Hollywood's problems lately." Kimmel opened with his trademark smirk. "Some might say you're biting the hand that feeds you." The comment immediately shifted the atmosphere in the studio, with Rogen's smile faltering as he processed what felt like an ambush rather than the friendly chat he'd been promised. Rogen, clearly caught off guard by the aggressive opening, attempted to deflect with humor. "Well, Jimmy, I think speaking up for fair treatment of writers is hardly biting anyone's hand. It's called having principles." His response carried an edge that attentive viewers could detect, but Kimmel seemed oblivious to the warning signs, or perhaps chose to ignore them entirely. The host leaned forward in his chair, sensing an opportunity to create television gold at his guest's expense. "But isn't it convenient that you suddenly care about writers' rights when it affects your bottom line? I mean, you've been pretty quiet about industry issues for years." The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and the studio audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing they were witnessing something far removed from typical late-night entertainment. Rogen's jaw tightened visibly as he processed the implication. "That's not fair, Jimmy, and you know it. I've consistently supported labor rights throughout my career. Just because you haven't been paying attention doesn't mean I haven't been speaking up." His voice carried a strain that suggested he was working hard to maintain his composure, but cracks were already beginning to show in his usually laid-back demeanor. Kimmel, emboldened by what he perceived as getting under his guest's skin, pushed further. "Come on, Seth. You're a millionaire complaining about an industry that's made you incredibly wealthy. Don't you think that comes across as a little hypocritical to regular people watching at home?" The question was delivered with Kimmel's signature condescending tone, the same one that had irritated countless guests over the years, but rarely provoked such a visible reaction. The camera caught Rogen's hands clenching slightly as he leaned back in his chair, his famous laugh nowhere to be found. "You know what's hypocritical, Jimmy? Pretending to be someone's friend for 20 minutes on television while you're actually trying to tear them down for ratings. That's what's hypocritical." The response cut through the studio like a knife, and even the usually animated audience fell silent, sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Kimmel's expression flickered momentarily, revealing a flash of genuine surprise at the direct pushback, but he quickly recovered his composure. Whoa, Seth. I'm just asking the questions that people want answered. Isn't that what good television is supposed to do?" His attempt to frame the confrontation as journalistic integrity fell flat, coming across instead as a desperate attempt to justify his increasingly aggressive line of questioning. The tension in the studio was becoming unbearable, with crew members exchanging worried glances and the audience sitting in stunned silence. Rogen straightened in his chair, his voice taking on a harder edge than anyone had ever heard from the typically jovial actor. "Good television? Is that what you call ambushing your guests with accusations they haven't been given a chance to prepare for? Because where I come from, we call that something else entirely." Kimmel's mask was beginning to slip, revealing the calculating host beneath the friendly facade. "I think you're being a little dramatic, Seth. These are legitimate questions about your public statements." But his words lacked conviction, and everyone in the studio could sense that the host was losing control of the situation he had orchestrated. Kimmel made his fatal mistake by doubling down on his attack strategy, apparently believing he could break Rogen's resolve through sheer persistence. Look, Seth, I think you're getting defensive because you know there's truth to what I'm saying. You've made millions off the same system you're now criticizing. His voice carried a smugness that made even the production crew visibly uncomfortable. With several camera operators exchanging incredulous looks at their host's relentless pursuit of controversy, Rogen's response came like a thunderclap, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register that few had ever heard from the normally affable comedian. You want to talk about making millions off a broken system, Jimmy? Let's talk about how you've built your entire career on humiliating your guests for cheap laughs. At least I create something meaningful. The accusation hit its target with surgical precision, and Kimmel's confident facade cracked visibly for the first time in the interview. The studio audience, caught between discomfort and fascination, watched as their beloved late-night format transformed into something resembling a public execution. Kimmel's attempts to regain control were becoming increasingly desperate, his trademark humor replaced by a cutting defensiveness that revealed the insecure performer beneath the polished exterior. That's rich coming from someone who makes stoner comedies for a living, he shot back, his voice rising with obvious irritation. The personal nature of the attack crossed a line that both men recognized, but only Rogen seemed to understand the gravity of what was happening. His response came with the measured intensity of someone who had finally reached their breaking point. At least my movies don't rely on making people feel small to get laughs. That seems to be your specialty, both on and off camera. The words hung in the air like an indictment, causing several audience members to audibly gasp at the brutal honesty of the exchange. Kimmel's composure was disintegrating before the eyes of millions of viewers, his carefully constructed television persona crumbling under the weight of legitimate criticism. You know what, Seth? Maybe you should stick to what you know best and leave the real conversations to people who actually understand how to conduct them. The desperation in his voice was palpable, and even his most loyal fans watching at home could sense that their host was drowning in a confrontation he had foolishly initiated. The breaking point had been reached, but neither man was prepared for what came next. Rogen leaned forward in his chair, his voice carrying a quiet fury that was far more terrifying than any shouting match. Real conversations? Is that what you call ambushing your guests with gotcha questions they weren't prepared for? Because I call that cowardice, Jimmy. Pure and simple cowardice. The word cowardice seemed to echo through the studio, hitting Kimmel like a physical blow. What happened next would be replayed countless times across social media and news outlets. Kimmel, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage, made the catastrophic decision to escalate further rather than attempt to salvage the situation. You know what's cowardly, Seth? Coming on my show and then crying about the questions when they get a little tough. Maybe you should have stayed home if you can't handle real television. The attack was so vicious and unprofessional that even the show's producers were frantically signaling from off-camera for Kimmel to pull back. That Rogen's reaction was immediate and devastating. He slowly removed his microphone, the deliberate nature of his movements creating a tension so thick it was almost suffocating. Real television? Jimmy, this isn't television. This is a sad man trying to destroy someone else's reputation to make himself feel better about his own failures. His words carried the weight of absolute truth, and everyone in the studio knew they were witnessing a moment that would define both careers. The studio fell into a silence so complete that the mechanical hum of the cameras became audible. Kimmel, realizing too late that he had pushed too far, attempted one final desperate gambit to regain control of the narrative. Look, Seth, I think we're both getting a little heated here. Maybe we should take a step back and remember why you're here tonight. His voice carried a pleading quality that was painful to witness, but the damage had been done. Rogen stood slowly from his chair, the microphone still in his hand like a weapon he was choosing not to use. The movement was deliberate and final, signaling to everyone present that there would be no walking back from this moment. No, Jimmy, I remember exactly why I'm here, and I remember exactly what you promised this interview would be about. What I can't figure out is why you decided to turn it into this pathetic attempt at character assassination. His words carried the finality of a judge delivering a verdict. What happened next would be analyzed and dissected by media critics for years to come. Rogen, still holding his microphone, looked directly into the camera with an intensity that made viewers at home feel as though he was speaking directly to them. "You know what, Jimmy? I came here tonight to talk about my work, to connect with people who might enjoy what I create. Instead, I walked into an ambush designed to humiliate me for your entertainment." His voice carried a devastating calm that was far more powerful than any explosive outburst could have been. The camera operators, seasoned professionals who had seen countless celebrity meltdowns, found themselves transfixed by the raw authenticity of the moment. This wasn't manufactured drama or staged controversy. This was a genuine human being reaching his breaking point on live television, and everyone in the studio could feel the electricity of that authentic emotion crackling through the air. Kimmel, sensing that he was about to lose complete control of his own show, made one last desperate attempt to regain the upper hand. "Seth, come on, you're being way too sensitive about this. It's just television, man. Can't you take a joke?" The words came out strained and pathetic, revealing the hollow core of a man who had built his career on the discomfort of others and was finally being called to account for it. His voice cracked slightly on the word joke, betraying the desperation he was trying so hard to conceal. The response that came from Rogen was like watching a master craftsman demolish a poorly built structure with surgical precision. "A joke? Jimmy, there's nothing funny about what you've done here tonight. You lied to me. You lied to your audience, and you've turned what should have been a celebration of creativity into a public humiliation. That's not comedy. That's cruelty." Each word landed with the force of absolute truth, and even Kimmel's most ardent supporters watching at home couldn't deny the validity of the accusation. The studio audience, who had paid to see light entertainment, found themselves witnessing something far more significant: the complete dismantling of a television host's credibility in real time. Several audience members were visibly shifting in their seats, clearly uncomfortable with their unwitting participation in what had become a public shaming of their supposed entertainer-host. The usual energy of a live taping had been replaced by something heavy and oppressive, as if the very air in the studio had become thick with tension and disappointment. Behind the cameras, production assistants were frantically whispering into their headsets, unsure whether to cut to commercial or continue rolling on what was clearly becoming the most explosive moment in late-night television history. The show's director, a veteran of countless celebrity interviews, had never encountered a situation quite like this, where the guest was systematically destroying the host's reputation with nothing but truth and righteous indignation. Kimmel's final gambit was perhaps the most revealing moment of his entire career. "Look, Seth, if you can't handle the heat, maybe you shouldn't have agreed to come on the show." The words were delivered with such obvious desperation that they seemed to echo around the studio like the last gasps of a drowning man. His attempt to shift blame onto his guest only served to highlight his complete lack of professional integrity and personal accountability. The phrase "handle the heat" came out with such forced bravado that it actually made several audience members visibly cringe. Rogen's response was swift and final, delivered with the quiet authority of someone who had reached the absolute limit of their patience. "Handle the heat? Jimmy, I've been handling your pathetic attempts at gotcha journalism for the past 15 minutes. What I won't handle is being disrespected in front of an audience that deserves better than this circus act you call entertainment." He placed the microphone deliberately on the coffee table between them, the gesture carrying more weight than any dramatic flourish could have achieved. The soft thud of the microphone hitting the table seemed to reverberate through the silent studio like a gavel delivering a final judgment. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the mechanical whir of cameras that were capturing what would become one of the most replayed moments in television history. Even the usually restless studio audience had fallen completely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented: the complete destruction of a television host's authority by a guest who refused to be intimidated or manipulated. Kimmel, his face a mask of barely contained panic and embarrassment, made one final, catastrophic attempt to maintain his position of power. "Well, Seth, I guess this is what happens when Hollywood ego meets reality television." The words came out weak and unconvincing, the desperate attempt at a zinger falling flat in the oppressive atmosphere of the studio. His voice had taken on a higher pitch, betraying the panic he was trying so hard to conceal from his audience and the millions watching at home. What came next was the most devastating response in late-night television history. Rogen, already standing, turned to face Kimmel directly, his voice carrying a quiet intensity that made every person in the studio lean forward to catch his words. "No, Jimmy. This is what happens when a professional meets a bully who's finally been called out for his behavior. The difference is, I'll sleep well tonight knowing I stood up for myself and every other guest you've ambushed over the years." The indictment was complete and devastating, leaving Kimmel exposed as exactly what Rogen had accused him of being, a bully who had hidden behind the protection of his platform for far too long. The host's attempts to respond were cut short, as Rogen continued his methodical destruction of Kimmel's credibility, each word carefully chosen for maximum impact. "You know what the saddest part about all of this is, Jimmy? Your audience came here tonight expecting to laugh, to feel good, to be entertained. Instead, you've subjected them to this embarrassing display of your own insecurities and unprofessionalism. They deserved better, and frankly, so did I." The words hit their target with surgical precision, and several audience members could be seen nodding in agreement, their loyalty to their host clearly shaken by what they had witnessed. With those words, Rogen turned away from the host's desk, his movement decisive and final. But before he could take his first step toward the exit, he paused and turned back one final time, delivering what would become the most quoted line from the entire confrontation. "You know, Jimmy, I've been in this business for over 20 years, and I've met my share of difficult people. But I've never encountered someone who seemed to take such genuine pleasure in making others uncomfortable. That's not entertainment. That's sadism." The accusation of sadism hung in the air like a toxic cloud, and Kimmel's face went completely white as the full implications of the statement sank in. This wasn't just a professional disagreement anymore. This was a fundamental character assassination delivered with such calm authority that it was impossible to dismiss or deflect. The walk to the exit seemed to take an eternity, with every step carrying the weight of a man who had chosen dignity over submission. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most beloved figures made his way toward the stage exit, leaving behind a host whose credibility lay in ruins on the studio floor. With each step, Rogen seemed to grow taller. While Kimmel appeared to shrink further into his chair as Rogen reached the edge of the stage, he stopped once more and addressed the audience directly, bypassing Kimmel entirely. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize that your evening out became this uncomfortable spectacle. You came here to have fun, and instead you got dragged into someone else's personal issues. That's not fair to any of you." The gracious acknowledgement of the audience's experience only served to highlight Kimmel's complete failure as a host and entertainer. Kimmel, left alone at his desk with cameras still rolling, could only watch helplessly as his guest disappeared through the exit that led backstage. The host's attempts to salvage the situation with humor or commentary fell completely flat, his usual quick wit abandoned in the face of such a complete and public humiliation. His hands visibly shook as he reached for his water glass, the tremor betraying just how deeply the confrontation had affected him. The production team scrambled to figure out how to handle the remaining segments of the show, but it was clear that nothing could follow what had just occurred. The energy in the studio had been completely drained, replaced by an uncomfortable tension that seemed to press down on everyone present like a physical weight as the studio doors closed behind Rogen. With a definitive click that seemed to echo through the silent studio, the full impact of what had just occurred began to settle over everyone present. The audience, the crew, and millions of viewers at home had just witnessed the complete dismantling of a television host's authority and the triumphant exit of a guest who had refused to be victimized for entertainment value. The final image burned into the minds of viewers was Kimmel, sitting alone at his desk, the empty guest chair beside him serving as a stark reminder of his complete failure as both a host and a human being. His usual confident posture had been replaced by a defeated slump, and his trademark smirk had vanished entirely, replaced by the shell-shocked expression of someone who had just been thoroughly and publicly exposed. The confrontation was over, but its impact would reverberate through the entertainment industry for years to come, serving as a definitive reminder that bullying disguised as entertainment would no longer be tolerated by the very people it sought to exploit. In those final moments, as the cameras continued to roll on Kimmel's humiliation, it became clear that the balance of power in late-night television had shifted permanently, and the era of hosts treating their guests as disposable entertainment had come to a dramatic and decisive end.